Everywhere you turn, somebody has something to say about who you should vote for, or what policies really matter, or whose secret scandal is the most scandalous. There's a lot to keep track of in order to be an informed voter, and a lot of it starts way back in American history. Has it always been this way? Does it have to be this way? Was Abraham Lincoln really a shady nutmeg dealer? Hi, I'm Erica Brzezowski, and here are 8 things you should know about US presidential elections so you can actually use the tiny bit of power our country lets you have. In those early days, presidential elections looked kinda different than they do now. So what was the first presidential election like? Since 1787, when our founding fathers all sat down for a rousing game of backgammon, to write up the Constitution, the United States has been committed to rule by the people. In practical terms, that means US citizens get to choose their own leaders, their mayors and their congresspeople, and their president. Okay, that last one gets a little more complicated, but we'll get into it. The Founding Fathers laid out all these ideas really early in the Constitution, which established stuff like the 4-year term for presidents, the fact that presidents have to be US citizens over the age of 35, and the general idea that the guy with the most votes wins, at least theoretically. But not all their ideas about elections held up over time. Like take the first presidential election in February of 1789. Today, presidents and vice presidents run together as a single ticket, which people can either vote for or against. But in that first go-round, electors actually cast 2 votes on their ballots for their top 2 choices. And the first place winner, George Washington, got to be president, and his runner-up, John Adams, became the vice president. They kept on doing it like that until 1804, when the 12th Amendment tried another experimental approach. It decided that we should start voting separately for president and vice president, mostly so they wouldn't elect a pres and VP who were literally running against each other. And eventually it became the convention for a president and a vice president to run together as a single ticket. Those changes took care of some big problems, like when Andrew Jackson literally threatened to kill his vice president, John Calhoun. But our election system still wasn't totally great. Like, were historical presidential campaigns any more civilized than they are today? Not really. Turns out, slinging wildly unhinged insults at presidential candidates is a tale as old as time. Around the election of 1800, John Adams repeatedly called Alexander Hamilton, who was a big supporter of Adams' opponent, Thomas Jefferson, a bastard brat of a Scotch Pedler. And around the election of 1868, newspapers called Ulysses S. Grant a man of vile habits and of no ideas, a twaddler and a trimmer, and a drunken trouser maker. Even the great Abe Lincoln wasn't safe. In 1860, the Charleston Mercury said, "A horrid-looking wretch he is, sooty and scoundrelly in aspect, a cross between the nutmeg dealer, the horse swapper, and the nightman." I'm sorry, what's wrong with nutmeg? These people would have hated the era of pumpkin spice. And there's another presidential campaign minefield we never let go of either. What actually is the Electoral College? Cutting, creative insults aren't the only thing we retain from ye olden times. Those guys who originally cast their ballots for George Washington and John Adams were electors, people appointed by their states to cast votes in a US presidential election. And that's one presidential election tradition that hasn't changed yet. Most elected offices in the US government are appointed by popular vote. Candidates run for an office, the people living in their jurisdiction vote for who they want to win, and the person who gets the most votes gets the job. It goes that way for almost everyone, from school board members to city mayors to senators and House reps. But not for the president. Back in 1787, the Founding Fathers had some concerns about how to elect the president. Some of them wanted to do it like everything else, by popular vote. But at that time in history, no country in the world had their citizens directly elect the executive office. And without TV, or radio, or all those texts from Nancy Pelosi, they were worried that 18th century voters wouldn't be able to learn enough about big national elections to make an informed decision. So some of the Founding Fathers wanted Congress to elect the president instead, which the other guys didn't like because they thought it would corrupt the separation of powers. The dudes at the Constitutional Convention argued about this for months, until finally they arrived at a kind of weird compromise. They decided that in presidential election years, each state would appoint a temporary group of electors, and those people would be the ones to cast their votes for president. So how do we pick who those guys are? Who tells them who to vote for? In the beginning, those questions didn't even have clear answers. Some states picked their electors by popular vote, but some of them were appointed by the state legislature, or even just the state governor and a council. These days, electors are usually chosen by political parties at state party conventions, and they basically cross their hearts that they'll vote for their party's candidate. Then the popular vote within each state decides which party's electors will go cast their votes in the Electoral College. So, on election day, you, me, and that Scotch Pedler over there all vote for the president and vice president we want to win. But in reality, we're voting for which party's electors will go up and actually vote. But what if those electors go rogue? Technically, electors could go up and vote for whoever they wanted. The other major party candidate, or a third party candidate, or your local nutmeg dealer. Electors who don't vote for the ticket they said they would are called faithless electors, and it is theoretically possible they could change the outcome of an election. Throughout US history, there have been something like 160-ish of those faithless electors, which, in a country where elections can come down to 22 or 5 or 1 electoral vote, seems like kind of a lot. Most states have laws that require electors to vote for the ticket they said they would, and about 20 of them have laws saying that faithless electors can be penalized or replaced. Faithless electors are kind of a fundamental problem with the Electoral College system, and they're not the only one. The biggest issue people have with the Electoral College doesn't have anything to do with the electors themselves. So what is the problem with the Electoral College? Well, it's that the system makes it hard for those electors to actually represent American voters. Today, in 2024, the Electoral College is made up of 538 people, divided up between all 50 states. Each state gets the same number of electors as it has members of Congress. 2 for the 2 senators, plus however many House representatives they have, which is based on the state population. But here's the thing. The House of Representatives is capped at 435 members, and each state is guaranteed at least 1. And the biggest states in the US have populations that are like 20 to 75 times bigger than the smallest states, which means that it's actually impossible to deal out those 435 House reps in a way that's truly proportional to states' populations. The math just can't math, and small states end up being overrepresented, which translates to presidential elections too. Like in 2023, California had a population of over 39 million people, and it had 54 electors. Wyoming had a population of about 580,000, and had the very smallest possible number of electors, which is 3. If we math that out, we can see that Wyoming has 1 elector for just about every 200,000 people. California has 1 elector for every 709,000. So 1 person's vote in Wyoming has 3.5 times the power of 1 person's vote in California. And in most states, the winner of the state's popular vote wins all of that state's electoral votes. So even if the vote in that state was really, really close, in the Electoral College, it might as well have been a unanimous victory. All of that has a weird consequence. If races in big states are really close, the winner of the nation's popular vote, the person that the most voters actually chose, can lose the Electoral College vote, which has happened. So far, 3 times in the 1800s, once in 2000, and once in 2016. In all of those elections, the person who became president got fewer votes than their opponent, but took the office anyway because of the Electoral College. Kind of understandably, a lot of people have things to say about that situation. Some of them think states should split up their electoral votes, sending some Democratic and some Republican electors depending on the proportion of votes each candidate got. They call that proportional representation, and a couple states already do something like it. And it could help the Electoral College more accurately reflect what people actually voted for. And a lot of people think we should get rid of the Electoral College altogether and elect the president by popular vote, like we do for almost everybody else. You might be thinking that this whole voting thing already looks a bit shady. So, does everyone in the US really have voting equality? Unfortunately, lots of groups of people in the US end up underrepresented in presidential elections, not just because of their state or their number of House reps, but because of who they are. This is a problem that started really, really early in US history. When our country was formed, basically only white men who owned property were allowed to vote. In the early 1800s, legislators started to lift that property owning requirement, but women and people of color were still majorly out of luck. After the Civil War and the Emancipation Proclamation, the 15th Amendment was supposed to ensure that people couldn't be denied the right to vote based on their race. And in 1920, women scrapped and clawed their way into the right to vote too. But voting inequality did not end there. Throughout the 1900s and into the Civil Rights era, sneaky policies like literacy tests, English language requirements, and poll poll taxes were designed to keep people of color, immigrants, and low-income people from voting. Civil rights activists kept on working hard for voting equality. In 1964, the 24th Amendment made poll taxes unconstitutional, and in 1965, Congress passed the Voting Rights Act, which forced a lot of states to change their discriminatory policies. And all that stuff was great. As ever, our country owes a ton to the grit of civil rights workers and people of color. But even after all that, we're still wrestling with voting inequality. Studies have documented a significant turnout gap between white and non-white voters in American elections. One of them found that in 3 elections from 2018 to 2022, 43% of eligible white voters voted every time, compared to only 27% for black voters, 21% for Asian voters, and 19% for Hispanic voters. The turnout gap has lots of causes, but one of them is pretty obvious. In 2013, the Supreme Court overruled Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, the one that made it so jurisdictions with a history of voting discrimination had to ask the federal government before they could change their voting policies. So, since then, those places have been able to put in place basically whatever voting measures they want, like stricter voter ID requirements and relocation of polling places. And those places, the ones that used to be covered by the Voting Rights Act but aren't anymore, are where the turnout gap is growing the fastest. So even though US democracy is supposed to be all about rule by the people, we still have some major issues when it comes to representative elections. But presidential elections not being totally representative might not be news to you, especially when you take a look at all the presidents in history. So why have almost all our presidents been white men? From that first election in 1789 to here where we're filming in September of 2024, every single one of our presidents has been a man, and all but one of them have been white. The situation is pretty much the same for vice presidents too. We've had a total of 1 non-white and 1 non-man vice president, and they're both the same person, Kamala Harris. Not only have so few women or people of color made it into the White House, we've hardly even made it onto major party ballots. And that's not all. Almost every US president has been Christian. Almost all of them have been in heterosexual marriages, and most of them were over 50 when they were inaugurated. And I wish I could tell you exactly why that is, besides the racism and sexism our country is literally built on. But in a country that's about 50% non-men, over 40% non-white, about 30% non-Christian, at least 5% non-straight, and over 60% under the age of 50, it's definitely something to think about. And all that leads us to our last important election question. If it all comes down to the Electoral College, and we don't really have voting equality, and even if we did, we're sometimes stuck voting for people who don't really represent us, do our votes really matter? Yes, of course they do. Or at least we here at Study Hall think so. Our Electoral College winner-takes-all voting system leaves lots of Americans underrepresented and disenfranchised. But even in our less than ideal system, voting is one of the best ways we have to make our voices heard. And even if there's an office or two you can't bring yourself to vote for, you can still make your vote count by voting down the ballot in presidential elections, and by voting in different elections like congressional midterms and state and local elections. Fewer people generally vote for those less flashy issues in offices, which means your vote is even more influential. And the state and local changes you can vote for might impact your community even more directly than who's sitting in the Oval Office. And lots of grassroots organizations are working to change how presidential elections work too, with ideas like ranked choice voting, which would give people more freedom to vote for candidates outside the 2 major parties, increasing voting access, and updating or eliminating the Electoral College. So if you're interested in changing things, those orgs can be a good place to start. But even just the way it is, the presidential race is determined in the end by US voters. So while your vote might not have as much power as it should, it still has power. And if enough people exercise that power, it can be enough to change things. So don't be a twaddler or a nutmeg dealer or a drunken trouser maker. Get yourself to the polls. You can check out the links in the description for some voting resources and to find a polling place near you. And if anybody asks, always remember that even the great Abraham Lincoln was a filthy storyteller, despot, old scoundrel, perjurer, liar, robber, thief, swindler, braggart, tyrant, buffoon, fiend, usurper, butcher, monster, land pirate, a long, lean, lank, lantern-jawed, high cheekbone, spavined, rail-splitting stallion. So No candidate is perfect. Go to vote.org to register to vote, check your registration status, and see what will be on your specific ballot. If you're interested in taking an online Power in Politics and U.S. Government course for just $25 and unlocking the chance to earn college credit from ASU, check out our GoStudyHall.com or click on the button to learn more. And if you want to help us out, give this video a like, comment what state you're voting in, and smash that subscribe button. Thanks for watching. See you next time.